Um, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. To introduce myself, I'm Sierra, I'm the editor-in-chief of Student Writing. Just a note up top, if you can't hear or see at any point, right now you should hopefully see like a slide with our logo and everything on it. So if you're not seeing that, please let us know. Send us a message in the chat or put it in the Q&A function so we can um, fix that issue as soon as possible. Um, we'll start this session with the two executive managing editors or EMEs for student writing, Josh and Penise. They'll provide an overview of the submission and review process for CRCL student writing. We'll do a Q&A at the end, so send your questions in the chat for us to answer at that point. And also just to note, a common question we get, this session will be recorded and posted on our website soon, along with the slides. We just had a website like renovation, so we're still figuring out the kinks of that, but we will get this recording and slides up as soon as possible. All right. Now, we'll transition into a brief overview of CRCL student writing. And to jump into that, like I said, I'm Sierra. I'm the editor-in-chief of Student Writing. I'm one of the five editors-in-chief of the journal. There are two executive managing editors of Student Writing. Like I said, that's Josh and Penise, who you'll hear from shortly. We have a team of 14 student writing editors, or SWEs, who work with us to review all of your submissions. And once the submissions are selected, the SWEs help to edit the articles that will be published. And so I will go ahead and turn it over to Josh to talk to you all about why you should submit to CRCL, what you can write about, and what to submit.
Hi all, thanks so much for joining. It's great to see so many people on Zoom, and we are excited to see what you have written for us. So why should you submit if you're on the fence about submitting? Honestly, skipping down to the last bullet point, why not? Um, we are a journal that really loves welcoming ideas from students all across the country, all across the world, truly. And so this is your opportunity to share your ideas with the world. It's an opportunity to, if you have a favorite paper from a class that you've been working on, to really dive deep into that paper, to work on it perhaps with a professor, get some peer review feedback on that, and really develop it into an idea that you feel proud of and that you feel can contribute to progressive scholarship. It's a chance to improve your writing. Um, you get to work collaboratively with us as editors to develop your piece. And so that's a really kind of exciting opportunity to think critically about your writing, perhaps in a way that you haven't done before. You can use it as a writing sample if you're looking forward to jobs, to clerkship applications, etc. This is a chance to really show your legal and analytical skills and your ability to write in a kind of persuasive and clear manner. You can put it on your resume. That's something that we as law students are always thinking about. So again, why not? Please, if you have something that you're excited that you've already started writing or want to write about, consider submitting to CRCL. So what should you write about? Again, if you have a particular class that paper that you think might be a good fit, for sure, feel free to send us an email or kind of think about whether it fits into the purview of the journal. But we are a progressive law review. We publish anything within the realm of civil rights and civil liberties. Obviously, that can be a bit of a fuzzy topic, but if it's not obviously outside of the scope of progressive scholarship, we are able to review it. Um, and sometimes we decide that doesn't fall quite within the scope, and we'll let you know. But if you're on the fence about it, we encourage you to submit it. And again, because it is such a broad category, we are able to accept a wide range of articles. Some examples of things that would fall outside of the scope of CRCL do include pieces about international law, uh, pieces that don't obviously connect specifically to progressive scholarship, pieces where the thesis doesn't aim to advance either civil rights or civil liberties. But everything else is fair game. So again, if you're on the fence, consider submitting. For examples of topics that do fall within the scope, we encourage you to check out our website. Again, I think it is in a bit of limbo right now, but we should have kind of past publications showing what works from past students we have published in the past. So you're welcome to explore that and kind of figure out if you think that your paper idea falls within the scope of the journal. So what do you actually submit? One brief point on submitting incomplete drafts. We do actually allow you to submit a paper that is not fully finished. We understand that y'all are students, that these papers are a lot of work. If you have something that you're really excited about writing, that you've started writing, that you've made substantial progress on, that maybe you're writing for a current class, um, we welcome you to submit that. We do accept incomplete drafts. A note on that, though, obviously, it is easier for us to review, to fully consider, to deliberate about, and to understand sort of the work that a draft will require to get to publication when the draft is fully complete. So it is not something that automatically hurts you in the process, but there is a kind of natural advantage to having a full draft. However, again, if you have a piece that you're excited about that isn't quite finished yet, you may still submit that. Now, two unique things about CRCL's process are, again, we do accept incomplete drafts, but this does not mean that we accept, a list of random thoughts or anything like that for class. Like we'd want to see some sort of substantial progress to that. The draft should be complete as possible. A final note on that is that our editing process after article selection begins on October 27th, and so we would need a final draft by that date. So keep that October 27th date in your mind. The second thing about CRCL is that we do anonymous review, and so we take fairness in our review process very seriously. We anonymize all the submissions that we review, and we try to make sure that as we select articles that we aren't institutionalizing further, implicit biases about what sort of articles, what sort of institutions they're coming from, what sort of people they're coming from are worthy of publication. So we take that anonymous review very seriously. When you submit, we ask that you include a cover letter. So this cover letter is 2 to 4 pages. On that cover letter, we ask that you include 4 things: an abstract of the piece, the names of any faculty members who have assisted with your piece, so any relevant feedback that those professors may have had, whether that be the professor of the class that you're writing it for, or just a professor that you've reached out to discuss the piece. We want to be able to kind of trace that back and understand exactly how they've contributed to the piece and make sure that it's primarily your own work. Third, a list of the main sources for your piece, and we do mean the main sources. We don't need a extensive, complete list of everything that you've put in the paper, but sort of the main articles that kind of sum up the substantive kind of thrust of the paper to make sure that that's grounded in actual literature. And lastly, we ask that you include a preemption check. And by preemption check, we mean, actually, I'll get to a preemption check on later slide. But all of this information can be found on the submission page of our website. So this is an example of a cover letter. As you can see, we structure in a few different ways, but should include the things I mentioned on the previous slide. We will be posting a template soon that you can look at and use for your cover letter. This template will be optional. You're not penalized if you don't use it. However, it is helpful to have things in sort of standardized format for us to view. And if you're worried about perhaps missing information that we do want, then you can look to and use this template as an example. We want to offer this template as a reference, potentially helpful tool. This is a sample list of main sources, like the one that you should submit alongside your article. Again, it doesn't need to be the full list, but we want sort of the main pieces that you're using in your article. And then this is an example of a preemption check. Now, as you may know, preemption check is a good faith effort to identify the unique contribution of your research, whether you're building off another idea or piece, or to provide an idea of where your piece falls within the existing literature. Westlaw and Lexis offer useful guides on preemption checking, which we recommend using. Another tip for preemption checking is simply just searching your topic on Google Scholar and seeing what comes up. All of this would be what you would want to discuss in your preemption check in your cover letter. A detailed, persuasive preemption check is super helpful for us because it really makes the argument for you of what is novel about your piece, how it's contributing to progressive literature, and why CRCL should publish it. Please do not let the preemption check be sort of a throwaway thing in the submission process. It can really help you in the review process. So take the time to thoroughly consider how your piece contributes to the existing literature, how it distinguishes itself from published articles on the subject that already exist. This could involve identifying articles that seem similar to your own and explaining how they are different, how your piece differs from them or goes beyond articles. Again, your piece doesn't need to be, and shouldn't exist in isolation from other existing literature, but it does need to build off something or have some sort of novel contribution. Now I will hand it off to Panise to talk about a few other details regarding submissions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Josh. It was a pleasure to hear about all that helpful information. And hopefully, I will be able to present some as well. I'm Panise. It's a pleasure to meet you all. And I'm so excited to hopefully get to see some of your submissions. So, first question that I want to go over is the length of your student submission. How long it should be really depends. We published articles from everywhere in the 10,000 word range all the way to the 30,000 word range. We're really less concerned with length as we are with content, just like Josh was saying. Oftentimes, the length anyway will change as we go through the editing process, especially if it's something like fleshing out a new section that you maybe left underdeveloped, or tailoring a new section and getting rid of something that might not be as relevant to our readers. Pieces get longer and pieces get shorter, which is the essential crux of the matter. And so we're really not that concerned. The only time you should be thinking a little bit more about submission and length requirements is if you're really in like the 2,000 word range, so very, very short piece, or if you're like in the 100,000 word length. That should sort of indicate to you that maybe this isn't perfectly in the format of a law review note. That does not necessarily mean that you might be out of the running, but it might be best for you to be able to tailor what you're writing and maybe start preemptively cut down or preemptively flesh out some of those ideas before you submit. And that being said, I will say send us what you got, and we've been really happy to provide feedback in the past. We take pride in our ability to provide feedback to authors whose articles were not selected, and that's something that's really important to us because we know it's not easy to get published in a journal, but we are here to help you make that happen, even if it's not with us. And so some of you might have even submitted with us in the past, and you've hopefully received that feedback, but whatever the process ends up looking for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Next, we'll be discussing how articles are chosen. The submission process is pretty straightforward. Josh went over a lot of what your end will look like. And on our end, some good things to know is that the format is not Scholastica. It's actually much more simple. It's just a plain Google form that can be found on our website. We do ask that before you submit your paper, please do a Control F or Command F, whatever format you're using, for your own name. It is really important that your name not be anywhere, including on your cover letter. Make sure that there aren't any comments left in the document that could have your name as the author of the comment. Maybe check the metadata of a Word doc if you can do that, because Sierra is the only person who is supposed to know who submitted what. And the rest of us like to read everything anonymously, just to make sure that we're giving your article as fair of a chance as possible. We can't pass anything on to the student writing team that might have your name on it. And so it's really important that you make sure that your name isn't in there. Now, once you submit, as Josh mentioned, we review anonymously. The student writing team, which is 14 SWEs, gets together and we discuss all of the articles together. We select primarily between 5 and 8 submissions at this early stage, sometimes up to 10 if you guys are really rocking it this year. To present to an editorial board. And the editorial board is massive. It's about 100 people or so. And at that big meeting, we essentially present the proposed pieces to the board, who then have the opportunity to ask questions and engage in discussions about the articles. And then everyone on the board votes, and that determines what our next pieces are going to be. There's also more information about that democratic review process on our website. I know it can sound a little bit confusing at times. So you can check that out. We do try to be as transparent as possible and provide updates as the process moves along. And that's something that we really want to emphasize. We are not going to string you along if your article does not make it to the next round of review. You find out immediately. And if your article does make it to the next round of review, we also tell you that. So essentially, if you're getting silence from us, that means we're still processing. It doesn't mean anything good and it doesn't mean anything bad. Just hold on for more news. And also, again, to re-emphasize this, I know we said this earlier, but if your article is not selected, we will offer the chance for you to get some feedback if you're interested. And please feel free to take us up on that. Writing is hard, academia is hard, and we're here to help. Next, we have the timeline of submissions. So you could submit now. That is always ideal to have something in by the earlier date. It doesn't really change our process, but it makes it, I don't know, it's nice to see submissions popping in and for us to be able to check things out. We do ask that you submit by October 5th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're submitting an incomplete draft, that's totally fine, as Josh mentioned, but we do need to make sure that you have a complete draft by October 27th. Sometimes students are doing writing projects or writing groups, and that's okay if you have something in the works, but we need at least enough in that incomplete draft to be able to understand what you're getting at and to really be able to pitch it to the meeting for you. All right. And so next we get to the article selection process itself. So Josh and I essentially each shepherd an article through the article editing process, and you'll be paired with one of us. And we'll be your point of contact for the whole process. And essentially what we have are 2 rounds of review. The first round is more broad strokes suggestions from our team about sections you could flesh out or cut down, or new questions or ideas to consider. And then the second round is a lot more involved. So for the first round, generally you get the edits back by late November. We do ask that you have them back by early January. And so you have a decent amount of time to incorporate the changes. And for the second round, we give you additional edits by early February. And then we ask that you have them back to us later that month. The first round, again, is a bit more thematic, so we give you extra time for that. The second round should be a little bit more nitty gritty, and we'll be getting close to publishing by that point. After that, our whole team works on subciting. We really bring in everyone, and it really is a huge bit of a burden off of our shoulders if you try to blue book as much as possible. But don't worry about your blue booking being perfect. We have people who are here to do that. It's just, if you can make the workload a little lighter, we'll never complain. And so, yeah, we're very, very excited to help you move your article through the review process and to have it published with us. All right, FAQs. Here are some frequently asked questions to kick off our little Q&A discussion, and then we can transition to questions in the chat. So now is a great time to send them in the chat if you have anything burning at the back of your mind. So first, people often ask if they can submit to us and another journal that is accepting student notes. A lot of journals don't let you do that, but we are totally cool with that. That is perfectly fine. We also do have a website. As Josh mentioned, it is a little bit in flux, but it should be up and running very soon if any components are missing at the time. So please check our website before asking us a question. The answer is usually there. And if it isn't, the student writing email is also on our website, which you can use to contact us with any additional questions. Another big question, people are always wondering, can I submit multiple notes? You totally can. Typically, when people submit multiple papers, they are submitting all of the writing that they have. And Josh talked about this previously, we just ask that you make sure that any and all submissions you have fall within the scope of civil rights and civil liberties and progressive scholarship. It sucks for us to have to turn pieces down because sometimes they're just awesome, but they're not quite within the purview of the journal. And so it's really important to make sure that they match the journal thematically and in substance. And then another question, can I submit a note that I started working on as an undergrad? That is totally fine as long as you are currently a law student now, with the caveat that it's important to remember that the work generally needs to be in a law review style. I mentioned a little bit of this in the past with word length and how people who write too little or too much can sometimes be in the wrong format. But if you wrote a paper in undergrad that is more of an undergrad thesis style and less of a law review style, it's a good idea to edit it and get it into that law review format before you send it over to us. If it's not edited and it looks a lot more like an undergrad thesis, that might not be within the scope of what CRCL does. So I highly suggest, as previously mentioned, looking at what we published before in terms of our articles, in terms of our website, just to see what sort of topics and discussions are really useful and successful in our process.
Okay. Thank you, Penise and Josh. That was an overview of our student writing review process. Thank you for your attention and interest in publishing with our journal. We'll now go through some of the questions and the Q&A and the chat. So let's look. Just to read out the questions, what is the difference between articles and student writing? Can students also submit for full article publication? So CRCL does have our outside articles silo and then the student writing silo. Outside articles accepts pieces from non-students essentially, so practitioners, scholars, and the like. They don't accept from current JD students or current LLMs who have not practiced law. So that's sort of the core difference between the two is just who we accept from. But the student writing silo is a full public like article publication process, like we've described. Your piece would go through 2 rounds of editing. It's been selected by the entire editorial board. And so it's essentially the same process. It's just the main difference is that student writing obviously doesn't accept from the same cohort of individuals that our outside articles silo accepts from. So hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, please send a follow-up question. Okay. If your article is complete, but you want to revise it more, do you also get until October 27th to do that? You could send us a piece that you've revised. I will say that once your piece is submitted, like we've described, it'll go through, start moving through our process. So it'll be reviewed for, like we said, preemption and scope. It'll be assigned to an SWE to review. And so that process will keep moving. And so if you do submit your piece, like in a revised form, we can integrate that into the process. But your piece, as it's been submitted, will begin to move. And so if you're thinking about like revising it or something, feel free to send it along. Just know that the moment you hit submit, the piece is going to start moving through our process as is. Let's see. Okay. So the question in the Q&A was about a specific topic. And there's a lot of reference to the UN Convention. And so maybe this gets at our bit about international law being outside of the scope. And so the question was, would this be this sort of note that relies too much on international law and is outside the scope of the journal? So I think because of like the broad scope of civil rights and civil liberties, it would be a little difficult to make it off the cuff, kind of decision about whether that falls outside the scope. I think the best way to find out is to submit it to us. We'll let you know, especially like if it keeps moving through the process, like Panise mentioned, like we'll let you know if it's moved on to a different round in our selection, or we'll let you know that it didn't make it beyond the first round of our review. And so I would say go ahead and submit, and we'll let you know if it does fall within. I will say that we have published past pieces that have touched on international law subjects when they're like in a comparative nature and things like that. It just really depends on how much international law is like taking up within your piece, etc. Which is partly why we'll, go through screening it and everything. And yeah, so I would say just submit and we'll let you know if it does. Okay. This question is, I remember reading that student pieces should have a different scope than practitioner pieces. I think it was something specifically about legal claims and conclusions. Is that still the case? I'm not specifically sure. I haven't heard that. I think that at least for CRCL, like we're not like a student writing competition or something like that. So this is really like the same process as a piece by a practitioner would go through for student writing. I know some student pieces, they can get a bit more niche because you're writing about a particular issue or something versus a practitioner, but writing this long piece where they can capture a lot. But I think whatever you decide to put into your piece, I think the scope can be frankly, our scope is just, does it relate to civil rights and civil liberties, and is it progressive? And so if your piece falls within that, I would say go ahead and submit. I don't think there's really a distinction, at least for us, between what a practitioner or scholar might submit to our journal and what a student would. Do we have to format the submission in Harvard's law review article style, or will that be worked on later? That'll be worked on later. So if your piece is selected and goes through our editing process, the formatting itself will be done at a later stage. I think the main things that we would ask for in terms of like format is the cover letter, ensuring that you have like the four components that we went over in a format that delineates that you have covered those four key components of the cover letter. And then one of which is an abstract. So in terms of formatting, you would need an abstract at some point in your piece as well. But I think the format for the rest of your piece can really be vary. I would say the other formatting thing though that we do ask is that it is blue booked. And so if your piece is in like MLA or Chicago or something like that, it would be a really big help for you to blue book the piece instead. That would be a formatting thing that we would ask for. But I think in terms of like the format, if you're talking about like margins specific or anything like that or something, no, it doesn't have to be in that format. And like Josh mentioned, we'll post a template soon. And so you could kind of look at that and see a little bit more about the formatting that is helpful for us. And like we said, that would be an optional thing that you would use. I would say the components of the template are not optional, like the four components of the cover letter, but the formatting itself is fine. We do have on our website a bit more. Like, for example, we do ask that you name your piece in a particular format that helps us with keeping track of everything and stuff like that. So see our website and look out for that template. Okay. Um, do, do submissions that do not have professor feedback typically have a lower rate of being selected? I don't think and I don't know about like our historical data in terms of like rating or anything like that. I will say it is helpful to know that a professor has looked at your writing, especially if they advised you while you were writing your piece, and ensuring that, for example, like the substantive law that you're talking about, like a professor has looked at this, for example. I will say like that's just one data point that we're considering is whether you've gotten a professor to look at your piece to whatever extent that might be. Some people have submitted their pieces and they didn't get feedback necessarily on the paper, but this professor, they've talked with them about the paper and stuff like that. And so just knowing that a professor has helped you along the way and maybe would be willing to help you later on in the process as well, since they're aware of your paper, things like that. Those are things that we think about. But if you haven't received professor feedback, that's okay. It's just one data point amongst many that we consider for in our review process. Okay. How many articles do you want in the preemption check? Similarly, how many professors in the cover letter and what kind of comments from them are you looking for? I think I may have answered the two questions about professors in the cover letter and the kind of comments. But for the first question about preemption check, I think it varies. It's really like, are there articles that kind of are very central to your thesis? I would say think about like what is the thesis of your piece that you're submitting. And so if there are pieces that are very, very similar to your central thesis and to the point where like you would need to describe to someone like, oh, I'm not writing the same piece as this person has written, like it is different in this way, I would say those are definitely articles that you should be including in your preemption check. But it really varies. And we do our own preemption check as well. It's just incredibly helpful if you've done a thorough search too. And like Josh mentioned, Westlaw and Lexis both have really great guides on how to do your own preemption check, like what you should be looking for and stuff like that as well. So I would really look into that and see. And then with the examples in the slides, you can look at what was done in that example. And so that person, they made a constitutional argument and they said, oh, the argument that of this constitutional argument that was made in this article, like I am not writing the same thing and in because of this. And so I think it really varies. You don't have to be exhaustive. We don't want you to be like spending all this time trying to distinguish every article that's out there on your particular topic. It's really just ones that their thesis or is very similar to yours, and that would question whether your article is novel or has been preempted. Okay. Does a student submission need to be completely consistent with typical law review content? What if someone wants to blend sociology with typical law review analysis? So we have accepted pieces that do a mix of both law review content, I guess in the sense of like the typical commenting on a string of cases or a circuit split or something like that. Like if that's what maybe you mean by typical law review content. Um, People have done very different things. I think the central key, like we've kind of reiterated, is does it relate to civil rights and civil liberties, and is it progressive? And so I think if you're diverging too much from those core components into the realm of sociology, I would say then maybe like think about whether your piece relates within those buckets. But other than that, we've seen a lot of different pieces and have published a variety of pieces that, don't their central focus isn't law in the sense of like the cases and doctrine and things like that. And so I would really recommend looking through our website and going to the student notes kind of section and just, kind of looking back through and seeing what has been previously published has been successful in our process because not all of that is the typical sort of law review content article. Okay. When submitting professor feedback, what format should this be in? Is attached prior email correspondence okay? I think so. I think it's also okay to just summarize what your professor's feedback is in your cover letter. And so if you say, like, I have received substantive comments on my piece from this professor, or they advised me in my writing group over the course of the spring semester to produce this article. They've provided me with feedback on my central thesis, or they guided me in my research. I think just kind of doing a broad summary. We're not asking for you to be too technical or anything like that. And if your piece is selected, we will, potentially ask for whatever that professor feedback was, just as like a guidepost for us to know maybe what their thoughts were on your piece. As well, but it doesn't have to be in any particular format. You could just write like a paragraph in your cover letter, or you could list the name of the professor and advised in writing process or something like that. It is helpful to know like the extent, I think, to which the professor advised you or helped you with your piece. But you don't have to include like screenshots of emails or anything like that. You could just summarize the extent to which the professor assisted you or gave you feedback in your cover letter. Okay. So if your submission still has feedback from a professor and the comments or track changes, is that better than a clean copy? Um, I would say it's helpful to have the clean copy and then you summarize what the professor's comments were and track changes were. Because if you don't have a clean copy, I will then have to clean the copy. And so it's just helpful if you just kind of incorporate that feedback. I think if you're getting that feedback and it's feedback that you can incorporate, it would be great for you to incorporate it and then, note in your cover letter in a summary paragraph that you received this feedback to this extent, and you've incorporated that feedback. That's great. And so I would say like our preference would be for a clean copy, and then you just describe in your cover letter the extent to which the professor has given you feedback. And that's great if it is like substantive comments or technical edits or something like that. That's fantastic, and we would love to know that. Yeah. Okay, I think there was maybe I'm gonna just make sure I went through, answered these. Okay, solid. I think there was one more. So the question was about a particular topic. Would the impact of discriminatory executive orders on Black women in the federal workforce be an appropriate topic? This person worked for a particular organization. I think that that would be, it sounds like it would be within the scope of our journal. I think with the first, another question that had a similar sort of format about a particular topic. Again, it's difficult off the cuff to just know, which is why we have our like screening process. So I really encourage you like to submit the piece, and then we can get a better sense of whether it falls within the scope. And I think also just thinking about what has been on our like website previously, like I've said, it's really difficult to know. And so that's why, we go through the screening process, the SWEs, we talk about it and kind of think about whether it falls within the scope of our journal because we do acknowledge that a lot falls within the scope of our topic. And I know it can be really like ethereal and stuff like that and kind of difficult to know whether a piece will fall within it. And so we just encourage you to submit, and then we will let you know if it falls within our scope or if it's moving through the process of our selection. Yeah. Let's see. Any more questions? Okay. Well, I think we got all of the questions. Oh, here we go. Is there any pressure in this context from administration, justice, terminology, public works? Hmm. Um, I can say that our student writing process, we're moving through it the same as we have historically. And so we publish what we publish. And as of right now, we're operating the same as we always have. And so I encourage you to submit topics within what fits within our scope. And so, yeah, we're moving the same as we always have, and publishing what we have within progressive scholarship and CRCL. Okay. And thank you all for coming. We'll stay on if there are more questions, so please feel free to continue to send them in the Q&A or to us in the chat. And we really hope that you will all submit, and we look forward to reading all of your submissions. And we thank you for your interest in our journal. I know it takes a lot of courage to submit a piece to a journal and go through the process of wondering whether a piece will be published. And so we just really thank you. It helps us, publish amazing scholarship if you submit. But thank you all so much. Yeah, and we'll stay on until around 8 to answer questions.